Why is it not detecting it? Well, I need my other glasses.
How about a thumbs up if you can hear me? All right. Thank you very much. Welcome to the regular city council meeting of February 22nd. And at this point, I would like to call the meeting to order. My name is Rich Mays. I'm the mayor for the city of the Dalles. And at this point, I'd like to ask the city clerk to please call the roll.
Counselor Long Curtis,
Present.
Counselor McLaughlin,
Present.
Counselor Richardson,
Present.
Counselor Runyon,
Present.
Counselor Randall.
Present.
Thank you. At this point of the meeting, I'd like to ask Counselor Dan Richardson to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. You'll see a flag in the frame that says City of the Dalles. So Dan, please proceed.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Counselor Richardson. At this point, item 4 on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda?
This is Runyon. I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Mayor Mays, I'll go ahead and second. This is McLaughlin.
It's been moved by Counselor Runyon and seconded by Counselor McLaughlin to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
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 I get 5-0 unanimous. Thank you very much. I should say at the outset that this was originally supposed to be a joint meeting of the city council and the county commission. However, due to some technical issues, this will not be a joint meeting. It will be just a city council meeting. However, all 3 county commissioners are present here tonight. I'd like to introduce them. First, the presiding commissioner, Scott Hagee. Scott, you want to wave? Thank you. Second is County Commissioner Steve Kramer. And third would be County Commissioner Kathy Schwartz. We welcome all 3 of you to our meeting. My understanding is that your participation in this, because of legal issues, will be severely limited. Okay, now is item 5 is the audience participation. During this portion of the meeting, anyone may speak on any subject which does not later appear on the agenda. Our agreement with Google, of course, is going to be on the agenda later. Up to 5 minutes per person will be allowed. If a response by the city is requested, the speaker will be referred to the city manager for further action. The issue may appear on a future meeting agenda for city council consideration. Does anyone care to address the city council on any issue that is not on the agenda? Please either raise your hand or wave or speak up if we can't get to you to recognize you. Anybody? Okay. Items 6, 7, and 8 are reports from the staff and from the council. The mayor will not have a report tonight. Is there any city councilor or staff member that would like to make a report to the city council at this time? Okay, moving right along. Item 9 is the consent agenda. Items of a routine and non-controversial nature are placed on the consent agenda to allow the city council to spend its time and energy on the important items and issues. Any councilor may request an item be pulled from the consent agenda and be considered separately. Items pulled from the consent agenda would be placed on the agenda at the end of the action items section. We have 3 items on the consent agenda tonight. First is the approval of the January 29th work session. Second is the approval of the regular meeting of February 8th, the minutes for that. And finally, we have a resolution to concur with my 3 appointments to various committees. Mark Popoff and Alan Easling to the city's Plan Commission, and Dean Meyerson to the Urban Renewal Budget Committee. Do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you.
This is
I'll second
Rod.
it.
I'll second it.
It's been moved by Counselor Richardson and seconded by Counselor Runyon to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, we're now to item 10A on the agenda, which is the Strategic Investment Program with Google LLC. So we'll be discussing this at this time. This meeting, I first want to go through the process here. The first thing we'll hear from is Matthew Klebs, who is the Director of Administrative Services for Wasco County, and he is also the Enterprise Zone Manager. And he will be giving a presentation that, if he should correct me, but it'll be pretty similar to the one that was given at the County Commission meeting last week. And I expect that that'll be about 20 minutes. So Matthew, if I'm wrong, please let me know. Next, I'll make an opening statement. And after that, we're going to entertain questions from the elected officials. And after the elected officials ask their questions, we'll ask for public input from you all. And those of you that have Zoom screens will be recognized first. And then if you've called in over the phone, we'll get to you after that. And after all the comments are heard and all the questions are answered, I'll turn it back over to the elected officials for any closing comments or questions that they may have. At this point, before I turn it over to Mr. Klebs, I'd like to introduce the people that negotiated the negotiating team that negotiated what we are presenting for consideration. The negotiating team with Google, that negotiated with Google. First, yours truly, of course. Second was County Commissioner Steve Kramer. Third was County Administrator Tyler Stone. Also the County Assessor Jill Amory, City Manager Julie Kruger, and we also had former Mayor Steve Lawrence sit in on many sessions to advise us because he had, of course, negotiated deals with Google in the past. We also had Matthew Klebs, who I mentioned before is the Director of Administrative Services for Wasco County. And so at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Klebs to make his presentation on the SIP program. Mr. Klebs.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I believe Izetta has given me power to share the screen as well. Let me just format here. Hold on one moment. All right. Can everybody see the presentation as well?
Yes, I think we're there.
Perfect. So again, thank you, Mayor Mays and City Council. I'm here to give a presentation on the Strategic Investment Program, and I'll be working through this slide deck. Please feel free to ask councilors and commissioners. Please feel free to ask any questions on the current slide to achieve any kind of clarity or understanding that you may need. But for in-depth questions, let's please hold those to the end of the presentation. And so in this presentation, we'll be covering several different things. To start, we're going to be looking at the details of the program, the steps that have been taken to date, the project site that we'll be discussing, the summary of the different agreement categories and components, the next steps, and then of course, Q&A and comments at the end. And so to start, what I wanted to begin with was to do some broad brushstrokes on some of the differences between enterprise zones and enterprise zone agreements, which we all may be a little bit more familiar with, given the previous agreements we have, and the strategic investment program itself. And so in essence, they are both up to a 15-year property tax abatement program. The enterprise zone has specific requirements for job creation and wage and compensation minimums, while the strategic investment program is intended for large capital investments and has three distinct components that we'll get into later in the presentation. Another distinction I wanted to make was the difference between an ad hoc versus a strategic investment zone process. So again, we have an enterprise zone, we have a rural renewable energy development zone, and we're familiar with establishing those boundaries in those areas to incentivize investment. The strategic investment program has an ad hoc approval process where an agreement can be considered with a required public hearing. This process is what we'll be following, as we do not have a strategic investment zone here in Wasco County or the city of the Dalles. So counties and cities may create such a zone with Business Oregon approval, but we have not done that. We're following the ad hoc approval process. And that'll come up a little bit later in the presentation as well. So as I mentioned previously, there's several different components or categories to the strategic investment program. And there's three major ones. The first are property taxes, which are set in essence by Business Oregon or the state. The community service fee, again, set by Business Oregon or the state, with a distribution process utilizing input by the different taxing districts. And then the third is a locally negotiated component, which is between or developed between the applicant, the county, and the city where the development is located. And we'll dive into each one of these categories individually. The first category are property taxes. And this is a snip or a clip that I took right off of the Business Oregon's website. And what this shows is that Business Oregon has set 3 threshold levels where a portion of the development is taxed depending on their total investment. So as you can see on the slide in front of you, if their development or a development is under $500 million, an initial taxable portion of $25 million is taxed as normal and is distributed out to the relevant taxing districts. The next threshold is $500 million to $1 billion, and the initial taxable portion is $50 million. And then a development that invests over $1 billion, the initial taxable portion is $100 million. And each one of these categories has a 3% annual escalator to keep track over time. The second component I mentioned briefly is the community service fee. This CSF, or community service fee, is paid each year of a tax abatement, and it equals 25% of each year's tax savings, capped at a maximum of $2.5 million. And this distribution is set by county, city, and other non-school taxing districts. And essentially, we have to have an accounting or an agreement amongst 75% of the tax district levy at site. Now, this is not 75% of the total number of districts. This is 75% of the total tax levy or the tax authority at the site. And the objective here is to reach such an agreement within 3 months of approval by Business Oregon on a project's application. Now, this may be mutually amended or revised at a later time, but the key here is that if we do not reach some kind of an agreement within that 90-day window, Business Oregon has the authority to come in and set that distribution fee on their own methodology. So in essence, some of the steps that have been taken to date is Design LLC or Google has expressed an interest in a SIP agreement under the ad hoc approval process. As I mentioned before, we do not have a strategic investment zone for the development at a site that they've already privately purchased. And city and county representatives have met with Design LLC representatives to negotiate the draft agreement that we have before you this evening. And I would add this at this moment that the SIP agreement is interesting because of feedback we've received both at the city and county for some of the components that we've discussed from different taxing districts who are interested in seeing some taxable portion at the beginning of a development, as well as input and some decision-making input into the distribution of the community service fee itself as well. So getting into some of the specifics of the project. So here is and I apologize, it's a little bit grainy on my screen at least. This is the project site. And I believe everybody can see my cursor, but the red highlighted areas at the top of your screen and down near the middle towards the right, those red areas are owned by Lockheed Martin. The yellow area is owned by Hydro or SAPA, the aluminum company we have here. And there are 2 blue parcels, parcel A and parcel B. Parcel A is the likely primary development site for the projects we'll be talking about, and is in essence the old aluminum site. Parcel B is the likely development site for some of the warehouses that may serve the property. and is also contains the land component of the agreement that we'll get into more detail in a couple of slides here. So the summary of the proposed agreement. So in essence, we will have two projects, which means two applications, two initial taxable values, two community service fees, all governed or all with one local agreement. Each project will have at least one data center plus support facilities. And like I mentioned previously, there'll be warehouses serving both projects. Each project may receive up to 15 years of tax abatement once completed, but all within a 20-year window from the beginning of the first project. So I've crafted a couple of examples, which are again hypothetical, to kind of capture what this means by a 20-year window with two 15-year projects. The first example that you see on our screen is, again, hypothetically, project one starts that 20-year window and can get up to the maximum of 15 years of property tax abatement. And let's say hypothetically, project two is completed in year 5. It can also receive the full 15 years of property tax abatement because it's still within that 20-year window. Another example is that, again, project one starts year 1 and can receive up to the full 15 years of property tax abatement. But let's say project two isn't finished until year 7. And what this means is that they can only get up to 13 years of tax abatement because the remaining 2 extend beyond that 20-year window. So it kind of bookends these tax abatements. Hopefully those examples made sense. And as I stated previously, this is per project, and there'll be 2 applications. And again, category 1 are property taxes. And so for each project, the applicant has expressed an anticipated investment level of about 600 million. And that puts them in that second threshold that we talked about previously. So per SIP statutes, an initial 50 million of assessed value will be of property tax will be taxed with that 3% increment annually. The community service fee is relatively straightforward, kind of following that the formula I outlined previously, which is 25% of their tax savings capped at 2.5 million. And so what do taxes on 50 million look like year 1? And again, this is hypothetical, not for use. Don't take a bond out tomorrow with these numbers. It's just to give you a sense. And so as you can see in the chart to the right, that the total taxes paid on 50 million would be roughly $909,000. And then you break that out amongst the relevant taxing districts to get an idea of what they could receive. So the third category is the local negotiated component or agreement. And this will be a bit of a heavy one, so I'll take it line by line. So initially, as part of the agreement, there will be a one-time $3 million initial payment for each project tied to a required construction and process form that they will submit annually during construction. So once that first CIP or construction and process form is submitted, within 60 days of that form, that initial payment would be due. And again, there'll be one for each project. The next component is a guaranteed annual payment or a gap payment. And this payment is based on the fact that project 1 will ultimately pay 50% of full tax, and project 2 will ultimately pay 60% of full tax. And so again, with the first 2 components we talked about, if the taxes they pay on the threshold that they land in and the community service fee that they pay add up to less than 50% of full tax for the first project and 60% of tax for the second project, the applicant will pay a gap or a guaranteed annual payment to the city and county to, in essence, make up the difference. So again, I tried to pull together an example. And again, this is not real numbers, hypothetical. But let's say that 50% of full tax is $5 million. The taxes they pay at 50 million, the threshold that they're in, equals 1 million. And the community service fee is maxed out at 2.5 million. Combine those two, and that gives you 3.5 million in payments. You take that away from the 5 million, which is 50% of full tax, and it gives you a gap payment of 1.5 million. Regardless of this formula, between the three components, taxes, property taxes, community service fee, and the gap, a $3 million minimum payment would be made for each project. And so again, to try and give you a sense of scale, or again, a projection, for the project one at 50%, if you take the property taxes plus the community service fee plus any required gap, we're looking at approximately $54 million. And for project two at 60%, we're looking at approximately $65 million. And this does not include the initial payments for each project. So a review of revenue distribution. Again, ultimately, depending on the final value of the development and what threshold they fall into, a tax calculation based on 50 million or its equivalent would be distributed to all the relevant taxing districts per project with that 3% escalator. The community service fee would be pending agreement, reaching that 75% taxing district levy within 90 days of a Business Oregon determination that the project is approved. And then the gap payment is made to the city and county. And the city and county have been working on a process that we had hoped to release within the year for the potential allocation of some of these other tax abatement funds. If this agreement is approved, I expect that process will be expedited and brought back to the city and commission just as quick as possible. Some additional components to the local negotiated agreement is a land component, like I mentioned previously. And so this is a transfer of a minimum of 35 acres of parcel B, that was that lower parcel in the map that I showed, near Norcor, and is made up in part of the old rodeo grounds. This would be at no cost and is pending some review of some due diligence information that we've received and are in the process of looking through. And this transfer would be to the county itself. It will also include a right of first refusal or a ROFR. And this allows or gives the option to the city and or county to purchase the property back from Google or Design LLC for up to 10 years after the end of the final abatement. So if it went for that full 20-year window, it would extend 10 more years beyond that. And if we were to exercise, the city or county were to exercise this option, there would be a $500,000 per project credit towards the purchase price to assist with any demolition or other site preparation costs that there may be. In essence, this idea came about in an effort to generate some different options should that property ever fall into disuse or operations may cease, and to help facilitate its reuse into something that may serve the community down the road. So there are some indirect benefits that I'll try and quantify here. As I stated at the beginning of the presentation, while a SIP agreement has no job creation requirements or wage and compensation requirements as an enterprise zone agreement does, the applicant does expect and expressed new direct and indirect jobs will be created, similar to other developments that we've seen in the community. They'll also be required to enter into a first source hiring agreement, as all enterprise zone agreements are required to do so as well. They'll also be working with and helping to clean up a challenged site within our community. And I had a question during the last session to expand on this a little bit more. And so the site has already undergone some extensive remediation. The federal EPA delisted the site as an actual Superfund site in 1996. And the Oregon DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, had issued a no further action notice in 2012. However, there's still quite a bit of infrastructure in place. There's quite a few easements. There's quite a degree of complexity with working and clearing that project and that parcel to make it site ready. There'll also be some additional water and power revenue. And the city has engaged with Google into the potential development of an aquifer storage and recovery system as well that could prove beneficial. So some of the next steps, and I apologize that my slide is incorrect here, but we have had a joint meeting with the City Council and the Wasco County Commission on last Wednesday. This evening, as Mayor Mays pointed out, this is not a joint public meeting. It's a meeting of the City Council on February 22nd at 5:30. And then potentially scheduled moving forward is a County Commission meeting on March 3rd to consider possible approval of this agreement, followed by the City Council meeting on March 8th. And so if and when a local agreement is approved, some of the next steps after that. So once the locally negotiated agreement is approved and the county officially requests determination by Business Oregon, the applicant will submit a project application for determination. These will be 2 applications. Those applications may be reviewed by Business Oregon staff for up to 21 days before being conveyed over to the commission for a decision. And if these applications are approved, the project can proceed for the terms reached. And this is what I want to expand upon a little bit further. So this agreement is solely focused on the tax abatement agreement and the economic incentive associated with the agreement. Google will continue developing, their project and their construction schedule and timelines, and will have to go through all the applicable processes at the local, state, and even federal level. Planning permits, building codes, any required environmental review, et cetera. This agreement is not intended and will not circumvent any of those processes. Locally, once we receive approval, we will also begin discussions about the distribution of the community service fee and the process that will take, as well as the funds generated by tax abatement agreements in general, and in particular this SIP agreement. And with that, I'd be happy to do my best to answer any questions anybody has, and we'll hand this back over to Mayor Mays. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. Before we get to the questions from the elected officials, I would like to let our audience know that the City Council and the County Commission received an email from a local resident, Widge Johnson, over the weekend. And in her email, she indicated that there was a recurrent question. I think this came up 5 years ago with the last Google agreement with people that she's talked with. And that question is, and I quote, "Is this already a done deal? Have the 8 folks who are voting on this already decided? If so, why on earth would you ask for input at this point? If the elected officials have already made up their minds, as some are hearing, this is all moot, and you should just make the announcement and move forward." I'm hoping the question can be addressed on Monday evening. I'm not one of the 8 people who will be voting on this, because I do not vote unless there's a tie. But full disclosure, I did help negotiate this agreement. So while I have, so do I have an open mind? And the answer is yes. And I do not think this is a done deal. Admittedly, because I helped negotiate this agreement, I might have less of an open mind than, say, the other 8 elected officials that actually are going to vote on this. At the conclusion of the negotiations that happened in early February, I thought that this agreement would bring a tremendous amount of benefits to our community, with the belief that if I was to hear something during that 1-month period of time that this has become public, that has the possibility of changing my attitude, that I would seriously consider it. As it stands now, and we still have a ways to go, I do have an open mind, and I don't think this is a done deal. And I'm waiting to hear something that won't make me believe that this agreement would be in the best long-term interests of the city of the Dalles and Wasco County. So that's where I'm coming from on this issue. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to ask if any other of the elected officials would like to comment on this being a done deal in their mind. I think, like I said, it's an important issue that should be addressed from the outset tonight. So would anybody like to comment on that? Any elected official? Okay.
Mayor Mays, this is Councilor Richardson.
Yes,
pop in
Councilor
here.
Richardson, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Widge. No, I will say, look, I've lost track of how many conversations I've had about this potential agreement. I'm definitely developing ideas and opinions about it, but no, this is by far a done deal. I think, at least for my part, and I'm sure most of the other elected officials would agree, we look forward to people with ideas or concerns or questions contacting us. You can find email addresses for us. You can find cell phone numbers for us. I've fielded several phone calls. I'm sure the others have as well. And we look forward to, or at least I look forward to, anyone who's really got questions, concerns, or opinions on this making themselves heard.
Thank you, Counselor. Anybody else?
Yes, this is Councilor McLaughlin. I've been at this now going on 10 years, and I fully understand the process for hearing. And it's a chance for the public to hear the facts surrounding a subject before we make a decision. And that's exactly what we're doing. Is Matthew Klebs presented the facts. We're listening. We take in input from the citizens. And then we base a decision on that at the end of this process. That's how I understand public hearings. The last previous one, I asked one question, just for the public record, and I didn't make any statements or comments. And it was for that reason that I was listening. I will publicly confirm that I will provide fair and equal treatment to all persons, claims and transactions during, and that will be coming before me for any decisions. That's my statement.
Thank you, Councilor McLaughlin. Anybody else?
Councilor Runyon, I do, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, go ahead, Councilor Runyon.
More of a statement than a question at this point. I too want to thank Widge Johnson for her letter, and I'd like to speak to several of the points that were in there, and I think if not all of the elected officials received it, most did. I hope you all had a chance to read it. So in addition to that letter, several conversations that have come up. This is not a done deal. What I would like to do is to kind of go over some of the things that Matthew talked about, both at our public hearing with the county and here tonight. A lot of people here tonight, citizens, are hearing this for the first time, and they're thinking about the deals of the past, and this is strikingly different. I was not a part of the negotiating committee. However, as a former port commissioner and county commissioner, I was definitely involved around the previous processes, and to that end, I have about 10 points here, if you'll bear with me. Some will be repetition to those covered here tonight. And for those that really know how it all works, I apologize to you, but to those that are new on the scene, I hope this will help to clarify in a little bit more human terms of what we are here for, the differences from the past, and a reminder that the company could build elsewhere, but has chosen the Dalles over all these years. Number one, the state, as described, has two programs that require a certain size of project to even be considered: the Enterprise Zone Program and the Strategic Investment Program, or SIP. And a company that appears to meet the state's criteria can apply. Design LLC, Google in this case, and the size of this private business project is considerable. And the private business, Google, already owns the land, as it was pointed out. Number three, at that point, the process comes to the local government. Part of the letter was about who was doing the negotiating and so forth, and is it a done deal? No. It comes to the local government to negotiate, and a team is put together. And as explained, our community team was made up of the county administrative officer and city manager and elected officials, who are all hired and elected voices of the citizens. I've said in past years that regarding this particular company, I would not support another enterprise zone program, but a SIP is a different animal. It's used very effectively by Sherman County as one example in their windmill projects to help a lot of people individually in their county. The fourth point is to answer the question posed directly. Community input is absolutely a part of this potential project. That citizen input, to me, has come in over the previous 15 plus years of the Google projects. And those things have been listened to. Hope I haven't lost my screen here. Hopefully you can still hear me. That citizen input has come in over time, and the summary of that input was for the separate tax districts to participate directly in the proceeds, not just in the major projects that the city and county decided upon, which, by the way, benefited the entire community with lump sums that would otherwise not have been available. A SIP gives us that opportunity to involve all the tax districts. The negotiating committee has come back with a proposal. And by the way, either party could at this point pull out. In this proposal, the city, county, and all the taxing districts within the SIP area will benefit through different triggers, and the taxing districts and tax rates proportional to that particular district. So 7, that means that as funds come to the taxing districts, citizens will then have a chance to have that direct ability to discuss with those districts, both in their budget processes and other mechanisms, how the funds will be used. So that is not part of this process right now, yet that will come later. So 8, at this point, it's not a part of the process. All we are looking at now is the first step. Do we move forward to finalize going forward with a SIP program as the tool? And 9, as pointed out a moment ago, as those funds near arrival, that is the time for the different citizens, groups, or entities to bring their individual projects or passions forward. That is not what we are here for today. And without this step, this particular step, there will be no individual projects to discuss. As a reminder of the elements that will benefit the community, the initial fee for each of the 2 projects, property taxes as we go along through the projects, community service fee, and the gap payment when a tax shortage occurs according to the formula. It was lengthy. I hope it helps. And it is not a done deal at this point. We have some steps to go through. And finally, Business Oregon will be in the mix as well. Thank you.
Councilor Runyon. Anybody else? Okay. I'm going to have to deviate from the agenda for a minute because one of the taxing districts that's very much affected by this is the fire district, and Dave Jacobs, who is the chair of that board, has his own board meeting tonight at 5:30 and would like to interrupt his board meeting to visit with us. So before I go back to the agenda, I would like to ask Mr. Jacobs. I know he wants to speak to the elected officials, and so I'm going to give him the opportunity to do it at this time. Again, my apologies for deviating from the agenda. Mr. Jacobs, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, go ahead.
I really appreciate.
You're either muted or Dave, we can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to speak louder. I appreciate your moving me up in your agenda. I do need to get back to my board meeting. My name is David Jacobs. I am currently the president on the board of Mid-Columbia Fire and Rescue. The Fire District Board has just met. I just left our meeting to discuss these SIP proposals, and it has empowered me to speak on their behalf. So I speak for the board at this point. We believe as a board that the city and the county have done a great job in negotiating an agreement with Design LLC, in addition to all parties agreeing to utilize the SIP program rather than enterprise zone, which allows for direct tax funding to the affected special districts. The direct tax funding for the first $50 million is a very positive step in improving sustainable funding for all taxing districts associated with these projects. These proposed projects will create 2 significantly large facilities, from what we're hearing, that the Mid-Columbia Fire Rescue will have to provide fire and EMS service to. Without significant sustainable funding into the future, Mid-Columbia Fire and Rescue will continue to struggle to provide an adequate level of protection for these facilities and the people within them. With that in mind, we feel strongly that the community service fee dollars should be distributed back to the appropriate taxing districts based on their taxing authority. We believe this is the most fair and equitable way to distribute these funds, knowing that the city and county will, in addition to receiving their share of the community service funds, will receive an additional $6 million per year in gap dollars for them to spend as they deem appropriate. We as a board realize there's a need for community projects that may be better used to these SIP dollars. However, there's nothing preventing the city, the county, or any other special district from sharing these community service fee or GAP dollars back out into the community as they deem appropriate through their individual boards and commissions. Most importantly, a stable funding source of revenue for Mid-Columbia Fire and Rescue from the initial tax threshold and the community service fees would allow Mid-Columbia Fire and Rescue to hire additional staffing, creating new jobs within the community and allowing the district to improve their level of service to both these facilities and the greater community at large. So as I close, Mid-Columbia Fire and Rescue Board appreciates the hard work the city and county have done to bring this proposal forward, and we support it as a board. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Jacobs. Thank you very much, and good luck with the rest of your board meeting. Thank you.
I'll leave you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, back to the agenda. This is an opportunity for the city council to ask questions of Mr. Klebs regarding this program. Does anybody, please, city council, either raise your hand or?
Mayor Mays, may I have a moment to interject?
Yes, please do.
And I know Mr. Jacobs has already signed off, but I will circle the wagons back with him. And this is just to clarify a statement he made that the GAP payment is a minimum of $3 million. The minimum $3 million payment is between the community service fee, the taxes, and the GAP. The GAP is going to be quite variable. The GAP is not a minimum of $3 million per project per year. I just want to make that distinction, and I'll circle back with Mr. Jacobs on that item.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, back to questions by the elected officials. Any questions by the elected officials?
I have one, just to clarify to everybody listening. It looks like we have a lot of folks. Matthew, the start date of Project One, is that at shovel turning or at some inked date on a contract?
So the beginning of their abatement period, is that what you're asking, Mr. Runyon?
Correct.
So the beginning of their abatement period is tied to a January 1st calendar date. And
Okay.
if the property was placed in service or not, was actually operational. I do believe we have Jill Amory on the call as well, who will either correct me quite quickly or may have some more context to add about some of that timing. And so every year, the applicant has to file either a construction in process or a claim form, depending on whether or not the facility was in operation as of January 1st. So it's not a set date. It's not like a groundbreaking date or anything like that. It has to do whether or not the building was in operation as of January 1st.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Other councils? Mr.
Mayor?
Yes, Councilor Long Curtis.
So my question, I think, will just maybe help clarify, or I think what some other people are asking, like what Widge was asking with her comments. I think that people don't really understand exactly how this is broken out into different sections. So what we're talking about tonight is only the strategic investment plan, the SIP, and whether or not we agree to enter into that with Google and how those funds would or wouldn't come to us, whether we would be doing the abatement or not. It doesn't actually discuss what the terms of the building or the plans for the structures or any of that would be, or how we would split that up with the taxing entities, correct? Those are three separate things.
So yes, I'm sorry, I didn't know if that was directed at me, but yes, this agreement focuses on the tax abatement component, primarily tied to the value of the development, those thresholds that it would land in, the different components of the SIP program itself for the proposed site. It has nothing to do with the construction of the buildings per se and what different building code or planning requirements there may be. It won't circumvent those processes, and also touches upon, like you said, Councilor Long Curtis, the generation of some of these funds, but not its distribution or its use.
Okay, so we're just clarifying for people that all we're looking when we do this agreement, which we're not tonight, we're taking public comment. It's simply about whether or not we're going to enter into a SIP agreement, or I suppose the other alternative would be to say that we're not going to offer any kind of tax abatement and have Google decide whether or not they wanted to build anyway. Is that correct?
Yes, we're reviewing the SIP program and taking that public comment. Yep.
Was any other questions, Councilor Long Curtis?
No, but just to clarify for people, it was asked before if this was a done deal, and I wanted to make sure people understood exactly what we were considering tonight. And I was not part of the negotiating team, and from my point of view, although it's not a done deal, it's a straight up or down, yes or no on whether or not we're going to enter into any kind of abatement agreement with Google, and that's the view that I am taking in making the
Thank you. Other questions from the elected officials?
I have one, Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind.
Councilor Richardson.
Yes, thank you. And this could go to you or to Matthew. Just clarifying or correcting, I've been using the number $120 million as a round number, understanding of the scope or scale of this proposed agreement. That is, that it would bring in conservatively at least $120 million over 20 years. Is that accurate? Is that a fair number to be using?
Matthew, go ahead.
Well, so I think, I guess the point I would like to make is that based on what we anticipate, and again, a development of about 600 million per project, 2 years from now or 3 years from now, however many years from now it takes for the project to be completed, it's going to be that final value of the development that sets the taxes, for instance. And so that number could vary. So the approximate numbers that we've given for project 1 and project 2 are based on those, percentage of full tax at 50 and 60, and the resulting thresholds that they'll land in. If they fall below 500 million, for instance, the taxable value would be lower. If they're over $1 billion, the taxable value would be higher, or the taxable portion would be higher, I should say. Regardless, that gap payment would help kind of shift that, but it lands in a different bucket, right? If there's more of a gap payment, there may be, or if there's less taxes, there might be more in a gap payment, and that's handled a little bit differently. It's not as, it won't be distributed to the taxing districts, for instance.
Right. I'm not asking about the buckets. I'm asking about all the three buckets, all three funding streams considered together. And I believe you said tonight at the presentation that project 1 has estimated combined total of about 54, and project 2 has an estimated total of about 65 million. So it's about 120 million. Is that right? Or am I missing something?
No, you're right on those projections. Yeah, 54 million for project 1, 65 per project 2, and then 2 initial payments of 3 million each.
Thank you.
And the 2 initial payments would take it up, closer to 125 million. Other questions?
Those would be the revenues, directly generated by the agreement. There'll be other direct and indirect benefits, as I mentioned on that one slide, water and power, et cetera.
Sure, but with regard to the SIP, as Councilor Long Curtis noted, it's an up or down vote on the proposed agreement, and the ramifications for the agreement are 120 or $125 million. That's kind of what's on the table if we go for it. Okay, thank you.
Other questions from the councilors? Okay. Let's see. we are ready to move into the public input portion of our council meeting. And I want to make an opening little statement here about that. I want to make sure people understand that the initial fee, as described, that $3 million, the community service fee, and the gap payments, again, no decision has been made yet on how those funds will be distributed. If you have an opinion on how those funds should be distributed, that's fair game now, and it's going to be fair game in the future when we get to this issue. But if you ask where those funds are going, the answer you're going to get is we don't know yet. Finally, on the subject of water usage, that issue is part of an agreement that is currently being negotiated between the city and Google. That proposal will come before the city council, probably within the next couple of months. And that meeting or meetings is going to be public. And while this agreement is expected to accommodate Google, it will also ensure an adequate water supply, I think it's fair to say, for the rest of all the city residents. So with that, if you'd like to say, make a comment or ask a question, please be respectful. Please be as brief as possible. And please either raise your hand or wave so I can see you. Okay, let's start with former Mayor Jim Wilcox. Mr. Wilcox. You're muted, Jim.
I'm sorry, I moved on the screen and I couldn't find me. I'm Jim Wilcox, address is 416 West 7th, the Dalles. And the thing about a done deal always kind of made me chuckle because we've got people that have been working on this for months and you're going to have to make the decision, but that's why people elected you, is to make the hard decisions. Not that you don't take input from the public, but you have a lot more information than Joe Average does. And I would ask you to do your duty and move forward. If there are comments that come in that make sense to change it. But I can say this, if you don't do anything, we won't have anything. It's very close to 15 years ago now that the first program, which was a different program, went with Google, and they're real close to being fully taxed. Had we not done that, we'd have no tax now. What we're doing here is adding to all of our taxing districts, which can provide more service then to the community without taxing the homeowner. Quite honestly, you're struggling with housing. This type of development does not create a lot of jobs, but it does provide a lot of taxes without having to come up with more housing, which we're already in a stretch for. So I think it's a good development in that situation. I would be one of those would be encourage you to the payments. This is all tax deferral is what it is, or tax abatement, no matter which bucket it's in, that's really what it is. And I really think it should go back out to the taxing, because it's in lieu of tax. It should go back to the taxing districts as in their percentage of participation. So that's where I stand on that. But I would encourage you to approve this. I think it is something that will be good for our community. It's going to really help the coffers of each of the taxing districts. And I commend the negotiating team for doing what you've done. Without this, we go nowhere. And having sat on the council and 11 years later, we still don't have a Walmart. And by the way, this project doesn't have its building permits and all that yet. So there's a lot of time to go to make this happen. I'm just hoping they're able to work through it and make this happen for the benefit of all. And I would encourage you to support getting into this agreement. We all win. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Brian Lauterbach.
Okay, hey, thanks, Mr. Mayor and the council. Appreciate you guys taking public input, as that is truly important to all of us. So I just want to thank, I'll keep it short. I just want to thank the strategic team for going out and meeting and getting this done. I too stand in support like Jim to this project as it's going to benefit the Dalles for many years to come. I'm just proud of the way it got handled, and you guys have stepped it through with the committee that went out and visited with them. So I too just put a hand up in support of this SIP program.
Thank you, Mr. Lauterbach. John,
Lauterbach. Sorry, Mr. Mays. I was hoping to get Mr. Lauterbach's name and address for the record, please.
I'm sorry, I got to remind, please state your name and address. Brian Lauterbach. Brian, can you give your address real quick?
Yeah, address is 1900 East 23rd.
Jim, you got Jim Wilcox's, right? Yeah. Okay, let's go to John Nelson.
Good evening. I'm John Nelson, and I'm chair of the North Wasco County School District 21. And I stand in support of a yes vote for this agreement. I think it will benefit the community more so than any other agreement we've had with Google in the past, by many times greater. And so I want to congratulate the strategic negotiating team. I think you did a really good job achieving a good deal. So I do want to point out, though, that if you distribute the funds through in a regular way across the taxing districts, the school district doesn't receive that benefit like all the other taxing districts, because the money that comes to the school district comes through a redistribution process from the state, where they distribute the money statewide under a very complicated formula, which has nothing to do with anything that goes on in Wasco County. So I just want to point that out. But in the past, you have given a lot of money through these Google arrangements to the school district for special projects. And I would like to suggest that from the greater amount of money that you have here, that could come to the school district in particular, that you dedicate yourself to helping pass a construction for a new high school. And this would benefit the community exponentially in terms of economic activity, the appearance of the community for businesses that enter. So I know you could find a way. You've done it in the past, and I would just like to suggest that. So I guess my question is, how could you donate to the school district under this SIP agreement? That's a question for Matthew.
Thank you, John. So as I understand, you're asking for how funds generated by this agreement could be allocated?
Yes, for us.
And I think, and as Mayor Mays may have mentioned, at this stage, entering into those conversations about the allocation of those funds is something that may follow with the eventual approval of the agreement. And so again, with the distribution of the community service fee, we'd have to reach that threshold of 75% of the taxing district levy. But the process for how we actually go about doing that has yet to be established, as it is not dictated by state. So staff is doing some research and inquiry to other communities that have had a SIP agreement to learn more about how they've done that, to help inform that process. But we have not completed that yet.
Okay. Well, thank you.
I might add that at least 2 elected officials at the county board meeting indicated that they would be in favor of putting that process on the fast track. And I personally agree with that sentiment. And so I think that it will be something that we'll be getting to sooner rather than later if this agreement is approved by the city council and the county commission. Okay, we've gone with John Nelson. Let's go to Doug Nelson, Douglas Nelson. Go ahead.
Let's make sure I'm unmuted. Doug Nelson. I live at 2534 East 18th Street in the Dalles. And I was riding my bike the last couple of days along the Riverfront Trail past the 2 Google facilities. And it just struck me what a great opportunity this is when a multinational company wants to invest over $1 billion in the Dalles. And to me, they are a leader in our new economy, and their confidence to want to move forward to invest in our community says a lot right there. As we've heard, these projects will bring jobs, both short-term and long-term, and they'll bring revenue to not only the city and the county, but all the taxing districts, which will be a boon to our entire community. There'll always be critics of a program like this, but you, and this is directed to the city councilors, one of your responsibilities is to support the economic vitality of our community. And I can't think of a greater opportunity for you to do that by approving this agreement. I think the positives far outweigh any negatives, and I fully urge you to support approving this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Let's go to Dr. Marta Cronin.
Good evening, Marta Cronin, 1301 Lambert Street. So as you discuss the potential of a Google expansion, I wanted to take just a moment to share a bit about how much these funds, which had been provided through the former enterprise zone model, have enabled Columbia Gorge Community College to benefit the community. As I'm sure you're all aware, we are building a skills center and student residence hall on our campus located on East Scenic Drive. Through community surveys and economic development data, we determined that there were many areas of unmet need as it related to local training, advanced metals fabrication, construction technology, and aviation maintenance. Through state bond funding, we were afforded $7.3 million to build a facility where we could provide the training for these much needed trades. Those funds required a dollar for dollar match. There was a firm deadline in February of 2019. Had these enterprise funds not been available, the college would likely not have been able to meet the match. The $3.5 million granted to us by the City of the Dalles and Wasco County enabled us to fund the other $3.8 million through a full faith and credit bond. A total debt of $7.3 million would not have been feasible for the long-term sustainability of the college. Additionally, we're all aware that there's a shortage of affordable housing in the Dalles. It's not uncommon to see students living in their vans on our campus. The addition of the residence hall will allow us to serve students who would otherwise have too long a commute to attend classes on a regular basis and cannot find somewhere affordable to stay. All of this without the need to ask voters for an additional tax levy, which historically is the primary means of raising money for major capital construction projects. The college has also benefited from this funding in the past and built a technology program. And I'm certain that we are not the only public entity that has benefited from this support, as we've heard tonight. In order to continue our mission of building dreams and transforming lives, the college will need to adapt and change. The support of the community is indispensable in this pursuit. From a college perspective, the financial support, both through the Enterprise Fund and the SIP programs, will allow us to better serve the community and ultimately benefit all who come to us seeking some sort of upward mobility, be it in their jobs or in their personal lives. This contributes to the economic growth of the region. So as you take on yet another weighty decision, which is what the citizens of this city have entrusted you to do, I wanted to provide you with the perspective of the college community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cronin. Let's go to Jeremy Thompson. Jeremy, could you give your name and address, please?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Mays. Commissioners, for the record, my name is Jeremy Thompson. I live at 3300 Doane Road in the Dalles. I wanted to reiterate what many of the speakers before me have said. I think this is an excellent opportunity to see further investment in our local community. The SIP agreement that our local officials have negotiated seems to be an excellent opportunity to add more funds to all of our local taxing districts. What I would like to challenge the team with is to feed on to what Mr. Nelson said earlier. I think this is also an opportunity to look at ways to invest further in our community and try to get some of these funds going towards our local schools. I think COVID has showed us, if nothing else, we've all recognized the challenges of our local schools. You know, seeing the struggles now that our district's going through to get our kids back in school because of the antiquated facilities we have should just be a further reason why we could use some of these monies to look at debt servicing, similar to what Dr. Cronin pointed out for the community college. This could be our opportunity to do the exact same thing, to try to get a new high school in our town. So I thank the team for everything they've done. I think this is an awesome opportunity. And I just encourage the team as we move forward to try to look at creative ways to use, especially the initial payment and the gap funds, some of the non-dedicated funds that are within this agreement, look at how we can put those forth to try to better the community schools and invest further in our town. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mike Courtney, your name and address, please.
Mike Courtney, 2437 East 18th Street, The Dalles. I'm here on behalf of Port of the Dalles. I've been a commissioner for more than 20 years and have watched this Google project from the beginning. What I can say is I can echo pretty much what everybody else has said and let you know that Port of the Dalles supports the project and supports the work that you folks have done to bring it to fruition. And one point that hasn't been mentioned very much is the idea of getting 35 acres of land back that's industrially zoned. Our history is we've put 5 to 10 jobs per acre at family wage and better in the industrial park, and that adds some potential to put more people to work in the Dalles. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. Let's go to Corliss Marsh. Name and address, please.
This is Corliss Marsh, 1401 East 21st Street here in the Dalles. I have one question before I begin. When the abatement starts when? What is the exact, is it like when construction starts or when the building is done?
Yeah, Mr. Cleaves.
So the abatement would begin once the building is in operation or completed. While they're building, they would be in a what you could call, what is called a construction and process phase. And so, not to expand too deeply, but that's where we see with some of the prior enterprise zone agreements, for instance, where the agreement was entered into in 2005, let's say, but the abatement didn't begin until 2007 because they had 2 years of construction, just as an example. So to more directly answer your question, the abatement would begin once they file their first claim and the building is in operation.
Thank you. So Mr. Mayor and city councilors, I'm a member of the library board, but I don't speak for them tonight. I speak personally. I speak in favor of the strategic investment plan as proposed. This is a great opportunity for the Dalles. There are many cities in Oregon that are envious of our position with Google. One of the pluses of this strategic plan is that the taxing districts receive their share. I know that the library district would welcome this money to enhance the offerings they do. In the first 2 projects with Google under the enterprise zone, the library district received no money. It will be another year before project 1 goes on the tax roll, and then the library would start to receive the 68 cents per $1,000 excess value. It is only fair that the taxing districts receive their share of the property tax now and not 15 years down the road. I also want to say that Google has been a community player from when it first came to the Dalles. There are many ways that Google has impacted this community by giving without any recognition. When entities receive grants from Google, they sign a non-disclosure agreement. Google is the only one that can announce that they awarded an agreement. Also, donations are given to employees that volunteer at local nonprofits. We need Google in the Dalles. Many of us use Google every day. Isn't it nice to know that they're in our backyard? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marsh. I see former Mayor Steve Lawrence here. Mr. Lawrence, go ahead.
get my technology going. Thank you. Steve Lawrence, 2017 View Court in the Dalles. My role in the negotiating team was basically to give perspective, but I want to say that I was very impressed with how this negotiation went. I'm not going to go into the specifics, but when you look at the first negotiated deal, it was totaled about 3.5 million. When you look at Google 2, it was about 13 million. When you look at Google 3, it was somewhere over 30 million. And now we're talking about 126 million. I was very impressed that actually Google came to us and said they wanted to talk about a SIP agreement because of all of the things that people have said. When we had distribution of the second agreement, you remember that we did things like give money to the fire district to build or to activate a second station, a training tower, and a volunteer program. We gave money to the airport. We paid off the Union Street underpass so that those tax monies actually were being withheld and could go back to Parks and Rec. This is going to be a great opportunity for this community. And again, I was very impressed with the skill and the dedication and the attention to detail of this negotiating deal and group. And I will recommend this 100%. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Let's go to Sheila Dooley. Please.
Okay. Sheila Dooley, 3300 Ventsville Road in Mosier. And I was at the county commission meeting last Wednesday, and Lana Jack talked about using some of the taxing money to help the Indians that are in the area that are living without electricity or running water. So I was kind of wondering if the fund distribution goes to the taxing entities. I don't know which taxing entities this would come out of. I assume it'd be a project of one of the taxing entities, but I just don't want to see the Indians get left out because I think it's a really worthy cause and really needed. Also, I was going to mention, I drove by the project area today. I noticed there were geese wintering over in ponds by the rodeo grounds. So I hope, well, it sounds like there's going to be an environmental impact study, but I just hope that this is taken into consideration. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dooley. Let's go to Philip Mosher.
Good evening, Philip Mosher, 914 West 15th Street in the Dalles. I have some questions about Google as a community member. Overall, I think this sounds like a fantastic agreement. The numbers all make perfect sense, and I can see how much it would benefit our community. My experience with Google as a community member has been that they've been largely absent. And I know that that's very much a personal experience. And I learned from Commissioner Hagee at the last Chamber of Commerce Government Affairs meeting that they actually have done a lot for the community over time and contributed in many ways. I've heard a lot of people reflect my own impression that they're largely absent. The Wi-Fi system they enabled for the city is horrible. Nobody wants to end up on that Wi-Fi because it doesn't work. And I know that there's a lot of like security concerns and such, and you know, people who work there can't even say they work there and all of that. So, and I'm sure that this is not the right forum to expand about how they have benefited the community. So my main question is, where could an interested community member go to learn about in what forms Google has contributed to the community? And I'm asking that because I think it is a question that is on many people's minds, and it would be good to put out information about that. How can we learn about how Google has contributed other than tax money and a non-working Wi-Fi system?
That's a fair question. And I think that unless another counselor has another suggestion, my recommendation would be to reach the people that we negotiated with and ask them for this information. As Ms. Marsh pointed out, and I wasn't aware of this, that sometimes when they give a donation to a community, they have you sign a non-disclosure agreement. But after this meeting is over, I'm going to reach out to the representatives of Google that I know and ask if they can publish or put out a list of some of the things they've done. I know I'm pretty sure they would do that. So
I think that would be really worthwhile to find a presentation or some forum by which to demonstrate what they have done for the community other than tax monies.
Right.
I have two other short questions, if I may.
Go ahead.
The first one is the first source hiring agreement. I'm not aware of what that means. Does that mean that local talent will be considered first, or what is a first source hiring agreement? I guess that goes to you, Matthew.
Right.
Yes, thank you, Philip. So a first source hiring agreement is a requirement of SIP and for enterprise zone programs, and is with the Oregon Employment Department. And essentially, it's intended to help individuals who are receiving job training or assistance supported through the Oregon Employment Department link up with some of these available jobs. So it's not necessarily locals, I guess you would say, that would be have first dibs, for instance. But it's a connection that helps the Oregon Employment Department connect individuals with job opportunities.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me. Thank you.
Well, I thought you had another question. That's it?
I do, but I think it would take too much time. Fine. Thank you.
At the end, Mr. Mosher, if you feel like we have extra time, we'll be here as long as you like. So
okay, thank you.
If you like.
I don't want to monopolize the time. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Scott Baker.
Scott, you're muted.
Hello, Scott Baker. I'm the Executive Director of Northern Wasco County Parks and Recreation District. Our office is at 602 West 2nd Street here in the Dalles. And I just want to join with the Fire District and the other districts we've heard of from tonight and urge the voting members to support this SIP project. It does so much good for our local taxing districts. And I'm just really pleased with the work and the thought that went into this proposal, and want to congratulate the SIP team for doing such a great job and getting such a win for our community. I just want to let you know that the data centers themselves are not the only people that will benefit from job creation as a result of this. I know our little taxing district, these added funds will allow us to hire more people at good wages and create more jobs in our community. So I know I said that at the last meeting, but not everybody was at the county meeting, so I wanted to reiterate it here. And anyway, thank you all. And it was just more of a statement than a question.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Let's go to Philip Brady. Mr. Brady, your name and address, please.
I'm Philip Brady. I live at 822 West 8th Street in the Dalles, Oregon. I am the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Mid-Columbia Medical Center. So on behalf of MCMC, I first want to share that unlike all the hardworking taxing entities and districts that make our community a wonderful place to live, MCMC is not requesting any funds from the SIP agreement. But we are very interested in completion of the agreement. Our Board of Trustees has considered the issue as it relates to land use and supports the negotiation that would lead to transfer of land to the county. It's a very useful item for. While not taking a position on the type of agreement, SIP or otherwise, We anticipate that the land transfer can lead to uses that promote the health of our citizens, both physically and economically. In closing, I appreciate the great efforts the city and staff and the county and staff have taken to move this far in negotiations, and I extend MCMC's commitment to be a partner in the next stages of the development of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Roger Nichols.
Thank you, sir. I'm interested in more information about the potential water use, and we heard a kind of a basic mention of some kind of intention on working on the aquifer. I would like to hear a lot more information about that, because I know that years ago, when they had the previous information, that at least 3 new police people in the city of the Dalles were funded by the additional income from previous Google expansions. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'd like to remind our audience that the issue of water usage and our negotiations with Google are being negotiated right now and will be the subject of a public city council meeting within the next couple of months. So thank you for that question. I see a Tiffany with her hand raised, and if you could identify yourself and give your address, I'd appreciate it. Go ahead.
Hi, Tiffany Woodside, and I'm at 3145 Cascade Avenue in Hood River. And my question, of course, is just the concern for the environment in general, knowing that that is a Superfund site and there's many toxins there, both in the soil and water. So I'm just wondering when that assessment comes along, as far as both the environment of moving that all around and the quality of the aquifers. And yeah, who will be overseeing that? I mean, that is my concern.
Okay.
So the toxicity of the site, you know, as they're building and moving stuff around, and then the water source. I mean, we know that aquifers, especially these days, are unsustainable. And I know in the other Google data centers, they utilize wastewater or industrial wastewater from the water plants, where they have also helped to fund construction of the water plants. So I'm just wondering if that's a possibility, if they're going to do like a 50-50, where they're using aquifers and industrial wastewater, or is that just all going to be covered at the water meeting? And if that's such, I mean, yeah, I guess my concern is the environment. So if we're moving forward, who is overseeing the health and safety of the Dallas citizens, given the toxicity of the site and disrupting all of that, and then utilizing the water? And then exactly what water sources are they planning on using?
Okay, the subject of the water and the aquifer would be a water issue that will be discussed in the aforementioned negotiations that are being taken place now with Google, and will be presented to the city council at a public meeting within the next couple of months. I'll give Matthew a shot at the rest of that question, because I would suggest that Matthew did point out toward the end of his presentation that if this agreement is passed by the city council and the county commission, Google would go through a very extensive permitting process that would address some of the issues you've raised. Matthew, is there anything more you can add to that?
Mayor Mays, there's not much more I can add to that. You know, this tax abatement agreement that we're looking at tonight will not circumvent any of the processes that they need to go through. If there's a required environmental review or environmental assessment, the company, you know, Google doing this development will have to go through that process. I don't have specifics on what that process is at this time.
Will the public be engaged in that process? Will that be kind of like the taxes are now? Will the public be updated? Where there'll be times for public input? I know that there's not public access to any of the permits. We don't really know how much water they're using now in their one facility. So how do we know, future water? And again, I know that in the Pacific Northwest, the aquifers are depleted. From what I've researched, industrial use has been limited. So at what point will Google disclose exactly what water sources they will be using, and if they will be pumping some other sort of water into the aquifers, or if they're using the natural aquifers, which, you know, again, are lying underneath an extremely known to be toxic site. So I'm just thinking, and there's very little, if any, I don't think there's any regulations on reuse of industrial water or the evaporative water that comes from the facility, or the hauling of waste. So none of those have regulations right now through the EPA. So I'm just wondering my concern is for the health of the Dalles.
Yeah, I think that's a legitimate concern, and it's one that we can certainly look into. The permitting process will take place at every level of government, national, state, and local. These are all public agencies. I do think that to the extent there's some trade secrets that need to be protected, that would certainly be protected. But for the most part, these are public agencies, and I would think that a lot of this process would be open to public scrutiny. And with that, that's something that we will check on and get more facts, and hopefully we can make it available at the city council meeting where we discuss the water and the aquifers. So thank you very much for that question.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Karen. Why don't you give your name and address, Karen?
Karen Mackey, 1820 Road. Kind of going off of what Tiffany said, but first I wanted to ask, at the last meeting, Mr. Mayor, you said you would get back to us with how much water Google is currently using. Do you have that information?
No, that is something that I've been told is confidential and cannot be disclosed at this time.
Okay.
The answer is no, I cannot. I'm sorry.
Okay, so we'll never know how much they're currently using. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think that would be appropriate to give that out, and that's something we can certainly check with our attorneys. Could you repeat your address, please? You kind of cut out there.
1822 Cherry Heights Road.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead. Did you have another question?
Yes, I did. Has a water use request been filled out for this whole process?
A water use request?
Yes.
The city?
Has Google or whoever would need to do this filled out a water use request?
Well, since we're in negotiations with them, I would assume that they have, but I'd have to ask Mr. Dave Anderson, our Director of Public Works, if Google has filled out a water usage request. Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor Mays. There hasn't been an official form filled out for water use yet. As the mayor indicated, the issues of water use and supply are currently under negotiation for a future agreement that'll be brought before council for consideration.
The reason I was asking is because my understanding is that there are 7, and I understand that's not what we're talking about tonight, but I will lead to what is being talked about tonight, is that there's 7 critical groundwater areas in Oregon, and one of them is the Dalles aquifer that I believe is what is being not discussed tonight, but what is Google or whoever is thinking about using. So having that critical status makes me very concerned because water is a finite resource. But something that was mentioned in the presentation was the aquifer storage and recovery or something that was sort of mentioned as a benefit to the Dalles. I'm not familiar if that could be expanded upon.
I'll have to call on Mr. Klebs or Mr. Andrew. Why don't we start with Matthew? Can you expand on the ASR at all?
Well, not to put Mr. Anderson on the spot, but he may be more of the expert in this area to answer that question.
Okay, Mr. Anderson.
Aquifer storage and recovery is a method of taking surface water through our water treatment plant in the winter when there is a surplus of a supply, treating it and putting it down a well into the aquifer for recovery later. It's actually a way to improve the sustainability of an aquifer. And it is an option that we're looking at in the future, and that Design LLC has actually paid for and provided the city with all the analysis, identifying that this might be a feasible option for us to implement in the future, and has also paid for the permitting for the city to move forward with such a program if we decide to in the future.
Okay, and one more quick thing, because at the last meeting, it was just mentioned that Google was going to, and I think this was how it was phrased, something about drilling into the aquifer. So that's different than what you're mentioning right now? Like drilling into the aquifer is different than this recovering?
That quote might be attributed to me, and I don't understand that comment because I never said anything about drilling into an aquifer. I barely know what an aquifer is, to tell you the truth. So I think you're referring to a comment in the newspaper that was attributed to me.
No, I'm not referring to sorry to interrupt you. You spoke and there was a woman that also spoke, and I'm trying to remember. Underground aquifer, Google picking up entire, these are the notes I jotted down from the last meeting. Something about an underground aquifer and Google picking up the entire, I guess, bill. So it's not, it had nothing to do with a newspaper article. This is based off of my.
Okay, you mentioned drilling into an aquifer. So anyway, again, that'll be brought up.
Underground aquifer was mentioned. So how would that be tapped into then, I guess, if it's not drilling?
I think the comment I'm referring to is the words drilling into the aquifer was used.
Okay.
Again, this will be brought up at the appropriate city council meeting within the next couple of months.
Okay, well, thank you for humoring me.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Okay, anybody else? Okay, I see 25 screens on my screen. I see 25 screens, and I don't see any hands raised. So if I can't,
Mayor Mays.
Yes.
I've scrolled over onto some of the other screens, and we have a Carolyn Wood and a Don Warren who have raised their hands.
Oh, thank you, Matthew, for that. Okay, let's go to Carolyn Wood.
Carolyn, you're muted. There you go.
Okay. No, I just want to say that I think this is terrific. It is going to bring us, my vague estimations, probably almost 3 times as much as what we've made off of the first 3 projects. The confusion about water, I can understand when people don't know where our water is coming from now. We have wells into the aquifer, and we have the system that comes off the mountain. So there's a lot more to that conversation, I'm sure. But anyway, there are also, I believe, wells on the aluminum property site that the aluminum plant used to use. So anyway, that's a big issue, but I don't think we have a deficiency in water. That's part of the reason they're here. My other concern or issue I think that we should be thinking about, and that is I'm concerned about the quantity of vapor, which is, I guess you call it steam or whatever it is that goes up into the air. How much that has increased the fog level and how much more it will increase the fog level and the impact that may have on our airport in the future. This one is closer or given the amount of money they want that's in this, I'm assuming the size of the facility is a lot larger and may put out a lot more than what we are getting now. And I sit up here where I can look out and see that come up, and oftentimes it levels off and just moves upriver. And on foggy days, we know we have enough fog, so that contributes to it. So my concern, and it's not you're going to answer it tonight, but I hope that you keep it in the mix when you discuss these items with the plant and their design. And why couldn't they recycle that back into whatever, into the aquifer or into the system, so that I would think that steam evaporating out of that plant must be pretty darn clean. So anyway, that's my thought, but I support it completely. I think you've done a very reasonable job in getting the finances back. And I have to say that the Dalles, because of what we've had already in the development of Google, has made a huge contribution to the financial stability of our community and city. And we're not one of those who's desperate for funds and worried about going bankrupt, which many cities apparently are around this country. So anyway, I want to say thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. I'll just comment on your comment that I'm sure your concern is going to be part of that permitting process. And part of the permitting process, as I understand it, is the FAA and the extent to which the thing you alluded to, the issue you alluded to would affect our airport. So I do know that they'll be going through a permitting process with the FAA. So thank you very much for that. Let's go to Mr. Don Warren.
Hello, and thank you everyone for all of your comments. So at the outset, I'll just say that I'm in favor of this. From studies that National Main Street has done, every dollar that's invested in a town has a 15 to 30x multiplier over a 10 to 20 year period. And due to something that Mr. Baker brought up, the money that we get from the taxes so far and into the future actually do support job growth, particularly in those agencies that are providing services in our community to make it more livable and a more wonderful place to be. So I support it overall. I think it's a great idea. I look forward to the furthering conversations once the SIP hopefully does get approved by all the voting members. I also want to thank the, I forgot his name who spoke up, I think it was Mr. Johnson for the schools. Had a similar thing as how do we make sure that we do get a new high school and possibly, you know, some sort of civic or community centers, but that's further down the road. I made a couple of notes before this, and I think you've covered most all of them. Yeah, when you get into the permitting process, my wife keeps saying, can't they put up some big trees or put a fabulously large mural on the side of those buildings? So that'll be other components. How can we make sure that it's beautiful and not detracting from the beautiful gorge? How can we somehow do a fool of the eye and make it look like it's part of the gorge basalt foundations or something? So wrapping up, since you've addressed all the other great issues, I just want to, you know, join everybody else that's thanking the negotiation team what they've done so far, and I look forward to participating in eating the bread once it's fully baked. That's reference to the Little Red Hen story. So thank you for planting the grain, watering the grain, and getting ready to harvest it. I'm here to help and partner with anybody as we make moves to help improve the community for each other in our whole region. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Let's go to Tanya Brumley.
Thank you, Mayor Mays. This is Tanya Brumley. I'm at 64891 Long Hollow Road, Dufur, Oregon. And it was advised that this would be the format in which to bring this up, although I do recognize that it's probably a little premature at this point, but just wanting to, Dawn mentioned it briefly as well, that in consideration, if this moves forward, that some design aesthetics could be looked into, specifically something that would be more welcoming as you enter the Dalles, which is not the case currently with the existing building. It's a bit of an eyesore as you come upon entry into the Dalles outside of Rowena. But So if we could take some consideration and look at art as a possibility to incorporate into design and make it maybe a little less industrial appearance, although that has its own aesthetics as well, and I realize that. But I think with our beautification that you have set forth in the city, that design, maybe this is the time finally with the third one to make something a little bit more appealing that reflects not only the history, but also the future of the Dalles, and that we would all be proud to look at daily when we drive by, especially since it's off the freeway. This is our front door to the community. This is our front porch, and it's our front yard. So let's make sure it looks the best it can if this moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent suggestion. Okay, I'm looking at the 25 screens on my screen, and I don't see any hands raised. Can anybody help me out, Matthew or Izetta? Can you get any other people have their hands raised?
I don't see any, Mayor.
Okay. Last call for comments or questions. Anybody? Okay, then at this point, we'll circle back to the city council and have the city council have any comments or questions of their own before we close. Any of the city councilors have any questions or comments? Oh, I saw Councilor Richardson, you unmuted yourself. Did you want to speak or?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm thinking about it. Look, we've talked about this. We're going to talk about this some more, and that's the water issue. I understand that there's an agreement under, I've heard what you have to say. I understand there's negotiations underway that will have a robust discussion about that agreement at some point in the future. But it would be nice if we could at least reassure our neighbors to the effect that, we're not going to let this process run us out of water, that someone's got an eye on it, even if we can't discuss exact quantities, that, we're not going to be turning off neighborhoods or shutting off water because of Google. And frankly, if we can't do that, that's going to be a problem when it comes time to vote. So at some point we need to be able to say, yeah, we've looked at this very carefully and reassure ourselves that that's the case.
I've already addressed that issue, and I think that's a concern. I'm glad you raised it again. And I think that there's I'd like to have Mr. Anderson comment if he thinks it's appropriate. And I said before, and I'll say it again, that we're going to ensure that the city residents have an adequate water supply after this is all said and done. Mr. Anderson, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, Mr. Mayor, you just said it. Those negotiations will focus on, from our perspective, protecting the city's interest to be able to supply all of our existing customers along with any new proposed development. And that's priority one. So I appreciate being able to reassure folks about that.
Thank you. And thanks for raising the issue again, Mr. Councilor Richardson. Anybody else? Last call. Okay, with that, we'll end this portion of the meeting. Thank you all very much for attending. We do have one other item to get to on the agenda. Just bear with me. This is action item 11A, amendment to the contract with Campbell Phillips for legal services. And I'd like to turn it over to our city manager, Julie Kruger. Ms. Kruger.
Thank you, Mayor Mays. This is a pretty straightforward recommendation on our legal services. As the city council is aware, we entered into this agreement to have legal services just about a year ago. So we have a year under our belts to realize that the initial base fee is certainly inadequate, as are the hours that we agreed to use our legal services for. We replaced a 50-hour a month contract from having a full-time city attorney, and we just need more hours than that. It's inadequate. So I have been working with Campbell Phillips, which is our firm, and they provided me with a proposed amendment, which is in your packet tonight, for a monthly fee of $15,750, which would provide us about 115 hours of service per month, which is more than double what we originally agreed to. And in that attachment, you'll see a graph that was prepared by Campbell Phillips that shows kind of average hours for the general legal counsel and the costs. So you see that we're well above every month. We just, we can't do it on 50 hours a month, basically, is the problem. So this proposal would help us stabilize the budget. We would put it in the fiscal year 21-22 budget at the amount of $15,750. And the staff recommendation is to authorize an amendment to the legal services agreement as attached with Campbell Phillips to set that retainer and monthly hours as I described. I would be happy to answer any questions. Jonathan is here, but he is our attorney who's covered under this agreement with Campbell Phillips, so I don't think he would like to comment. So if you have any questions, I'll try to answer those for you.
Any questions for the city manager? Okay, we'll entertain a motion to authorize the amendment to the agreement. Would anybody like to make a motion? Oh, Councilor Long Curtis, sorry.
No, that's fine. So I will move to authorize an amendment to the city's legal services agreement with Campbell Phillips PC to establish a set monthly retainer of $15,750 and increase the monthly hours to 100.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
It's been moved by Councilor Long Curtis and seconded by Councilor Richardson to approve the amendment to the agreement with Campbell Phillips. Is there any more discussion?
Yes.
Councilor
Runyon. I regret that I didn't make some more phone calls here and whatnot. Is there a date certain on this agreement now that this amendment will take place towards, so that we have some options as we go down the road?
We propose to make it effective July 1st because that's the new budget year.
And it would be for the next 1 year period or what?
Yes, that's correct, Councilor. We have already had one budget amendment to our legal department, and our finance director, I can see her sitting there. I believe we may have to have one more. This has just been a learning curve for all of us, I think, trying to figure out, now we don't have a staff attorney or paralegal or secretary, but we're getting all those services from our firm now. And so it's just an adjustment for us. And I think that this will take care of us for at least a year, if not longer.
Okay, and just off the top of my head, do you have a feeling or a knowledge that we are still under what the total costs were to have an on-site full-time attorney office and help in that office? Are we still under that figure?
Yes, I believe so, Councilor. The total annual cost, if you approve this increase, would be about $189,000 a year. So I think if you consider that we had two full-time, the city attorney, a full-time secretary, a part-time paralegal, and all of the expenses that were associated with having that office, I think we're still pretty well under that. And if I'm incorrect, I think the finance director will correct me.
Okay, I just wanted to get that verbally out there on the record, so it's something we should be thinking about as we monitor this going forward. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. And I would like to say that, I think there on some of our staff's part, and even including my own, it was a little scary for us to make this change, and we were unsure how it would go and whether we would have representation that we needed. And this firm has just been excellent. We're very happy with them.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I like to echo those words. I also have been very
Julie?
impressed with Mr. Kara and his predecessor and with the firm in general, and also working with Ms. Campbell. Any other comments or questions on this? Or
I think the finance director wanted to say something.
Okay, Ms. Wilson.
Councilor Runyon, to answer your question regarding the budget, we are still falling below the proposed budget or the annual cost of the legal in the history of the last 3 years previous.
Thank you, Angie. I just thought that was a question that citizens that are still with us listening might want to know, and we will keep an eye on it, and I trust you immensely. Thank you.
Any other discussion?
Thank you.
Okay, we do have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
I get unanimous approval, 5-0. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Before we adjourn, I'd like to thank the County Commission for attending our meeting. Commissioners Hagee, Kramer, and Schwartz, and also our County Assessor, Jill Amory. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you for all your help during these negotiations as well. This is the last call. Is there any other business to come before the City Council? Okay, thank you all very much. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming.